All right, we are gonna get started in just a second or so. Just give a chance for folks to jump in. All right, we're going to get started because I got a lot to share with you today. I'm super excited and I want to honor your time. So, welcome to part 2 of this 4-part series, Introversion Redefined. Today, I'm going to be diving into understanding what makes you an introvert. So, what makes an introvert an introvert? So, thank you for being here. If you are watching the replay later, thank you for watching the replay. So if you're here, if there's anyone here live, then just do me a favor, drop a comment in so I know you're here. I know you can hear me. I know you can see me. And maybe share with me what you're excited to learn about today. I would love to hear your comments on that. So I am super excited to host this 4-part series this month because I feel like there is a collective misunderstanding in our society about what it means to be introverted. And I think that's true between both extroverts and introverts. So if you're an introvert and you don't understand this fundamental part of yourself, then how can you be confident? I like to say unconditionally confident. How can you be unconditionally confident and then thrive? Because unconditionally confident, and when I say that, what I mean by that is no matter what situation you're in, no matter where you are, no matter what you're working on, you feel confident in yourself. And I think with a lot of introverts, we feel what I call conditionally confident, which is when you're confident in situations where you can just like basically be quiet, be quiet or be your more introverted self. You're not necessarily confident when you're in situations where it's more extroverted. So so if you don't understand this fundamental part of yourself, how can you get to that place where you can completely feel confident in who you are as you are, no matter what, no matter where you are? So that is the goal of this 4-part series. I'm just basically taking it back to the basics to help you understand what it means to be introverted, because probably nobody's ever really taught this to you. So always a good place to start. Now, before we get into our topic for today, let me take a pause and just introduce myself in case you are new to my world. I'm Vicki Regina. I am a certified coach and I work exclusively with introverts. I work on confidence and mindset, all of those things, really unraveling all of these beliefs that tell us that you can't do things or that you're limited. So I have been coaching for about 7 years. I did not initially work exclusively with introverts. That came a little bit later. I kind of started answering the call that I was having to work exclusively with introverts because of what I was saying about so much misunderstanding about what it means and what the opportunities are. Because I think a lot of introverts feel like they are limited because of being an introvert, or their introversion limits them. And it's not. Being an introvert isn't what limits you. Introversion doesn't limit you. It is your thoughts or your beliefs or your understanding about introversion. That is the part that limits you. And that part can be fixed. You don't need to fix being an introvert. You just need to fix your thoughts around it. So I found that when I really took the time to learn what it means to be an introvert, and I started to challenge all those beliefs that told me that I couldn't do certain things, I was able to figure out how to do pretty much anything I wanted in ways that aligned to me. And that allowed me to grow my confidence, feel much more energized on a daily basis. And that is what I try to do with my clients. That's what I not try to do. That's what I do with my clients when I work with my clients. So so a little bit about me. And so last week in part 1, I talked about common misconceptions that a lot of introverts believe that are actually limiting them. And I like to start there. So if you missed that, make sure to go back and watch it. But I like to start there because that's the lens that you're looking at yourself and your life and the world around you through. And so these beliefs that you have, these thoughts that you have around what you think you can or can't do because you're an introvert, or you think that you're less than or you're at a disadvantage because you're an introvert, you've had them for so long that they feel true to you, even if they're not true. And so before we can start to work on new realities for you and changing how you're thinking, you've got to get really clear and start to break down all those beliefs that are telling you what you think you can't do or where you think you're limited. So anyway, check that out if you missed it. But for today, like I said, we are going to be diving into what makes you an introvert. So I am going to be talking about the biological and biochemical differences between introverts and extroverts. I'm going to spend the bulk of the time today on that particular piece. And then I'm going to talk about the gifts of being an introvert, so the strengths that you have as an introvert that are directly related to those biological biochemical differences that I'm going to talk about. And then at the end, I'm going to talk about, once you're aware of all of this and you have more insight into what makes you as an introvert, I'm going to talk just very high level, like what can you do with that so that you are living more authentically and you are living in a way that's honoring who you are without you having to feel like you have to fake it as something that you're not. Okay. And this is all really, really important because, like I said, if you don't understand that this is how you're wired, well, then how can you show up differently, right? So when you understand that these are all biological things, these aren't things that you can or even should change about yourself, then you can start the process of accepting it, embracing it, and really stepping into who you are and leveraging your strengths. And when that happens, there's just so much more freedom that you can experience when that happens. So as we get started, if you have questions and anything that I'm talking about as we go through, please drop them into the comments. If there is anything that's really resonating with you, let me know. Just drop it in the comments. I'm going to keep an eye on it. I don't know if there's a lag or anything between me talking and you putting in comments, but if you drop something in and I don't see it right away, not to worry. I will get to any questions that come up before we wrap later in about 30 minutes or so. All right, so let's get started. So the first piece that I want to dive into, and like I said, the bulk of what I'm going to talk about today is the biological and the biochemical differences. So I'm going to be talking about three different things: neurotransmitters, our nervous system, and our brain. So we're going to start out with the neurotransmitters. So neurotransmitters are basically, to put it really, really simply, they are chemical messengers in our body. Our body needs them. We have to have them in order to function. And they are special chemicals that our nerve cells or our neurons use to communicate with each other and with other parts of our body. So there are two key ones that we're going to talk about today, and that is dopamine and acetylcholine. And these two are important because introverts and extroverts respond to them very differently. And so that's one part of that biological difference between introverts and extroverts. Now, both of these are pleasure chemicals. They make us feel good. They make us feel happy. But dopamine is more what I call outward focused. So the pleasure that we get from that chemical, when it makes us feel good, is when we are doing things that are, comes from the outside world, the external world. Whereas acetylcholine, that particular chemical, we feel pleasure or we feel good from that chemical when we are doing more inward focused things. So I'm going to dive into each of these to explain that a little bit more. So we're going to start with dopamine. So dopamine is a chemical that is released by the brain, and it provides the drive, the motivation to seek out external rewards. Again, it's externally focused, if you will. So external rewards mean things like, anything that's fun in the external world. It's social status. It's could be job titles, so career status, money, food, relationships, sex. All of those things are like external rewards that, if you think about that list of things I just rattled off, tend to also be the things that society tells us is what defines success, right? Job titles, money, all of that stuff. So dopamine gives us that drive to get out there, take action, and get all of those things. So it makes us feel good. Dopamine makes us feel happy. And when our brain is getting flooded with dopamine or our body's getting flooded with dopamine, we feel more talkative. We feel we're willing to take more risks. We want to be around other people. We're curious about our surroundings. We desire to be connected with other people. So, and this is true for both introverts and extroverts. So both introverts and extroverts feel that when you're getting hit with dopamine. Now, the difference is how we respond to it. So extroverts, the reward center of their brain is more active than introverts. Extroverts also have more dopamine receptors in their brain, which means they are less sensitive to dopamine. So that means that they need more of it in order to feel the positive effects from it. In order to feel good, they need more of it. So that's why they are more energized or excited by being out and about amongst all the people and the noise and all of that stuff. That gives them more of the dopamine that they need in order to feel really good from it. Now, introverts, on the other hand, we are more sensitive to dopamine. So we can't handle as much dopamine. And if we get too much of it, we get overstimulated and we get kind of jittery and it drains us and we start to shut down, right? So kind of an example to maybe explain that a little bit better is if you think about coffee, the caffeine in coffee. Some people are super, super sensitive to coffee, right? Like they can have one cup of coffee and then, or they can only have one cup of coffee and then they feel, really jittery. They feel anxious and sometimes they just don't even like feel good in their body. But other people can have like 5 gallons of coffee and drink it all day long. They don't seem to be impacted by it and they can still go to bed at night and get a good night's sleep, right? So the person that's super, super sensitive to the caffeine in coffee, they can't train their body to become less sensitive to it and eventually turn themselves into one of those people that can drink 5 gallons of coffee. They can't do that. So it's very, very similar in the sense, like if you could pour a cup of dopamine, introverts could handle, no, everybody's different. So it's not exactly the same, but introverts would only be able to handle maybe a cup, maybe 2 cups. There might be some introverts that could only handle a half a cup of dopamine. And then the extroverts are going to be like, just keep refilling this, just keep bringing me more. Every cup they drink makes them feel more and more and more energized. Now, the second chemical that we're going to talk about is acetylcholine. Acetylcholine is also a chemical that's released by the brain, and acetylcholine helps us to think deeply. It helps us to reflect on things, and it also helps us to focus intently for sustained periods of time. So acetylcholine makes us feel calm, it makes us feel content, but it also makes us feel alert. So we feel good when acetylcholine is present. We feel good when we're turning inward and doing things that allow us to be on the inside. So things like journaling, meditating, reading, going for a walk in nature, taking a long bath, creating things like art, if you're into art. It could also be working really intently on a project. Maybe at work when you can really focus in on things, you just lose all track of time. So you've probably heard getting in flow state, right? Getting in flow state is all about flooding your body with acetylcholine. And again, this is true for both introverts and extroverts. But just like dopamine, how we respond to it differs between introverts and extroverts. So it's basically an inverse relationship. So with dopamine, extroverts are less sensitive to it, so they need more of it. Introverts are more sensitive to it, and we need less of it. So when we get to acetylcholine, it's flipped. Introverts are less sensitive to it, so we need more of it to feel good. Extroverts are more sensitive to it, and they need less of it. So if you think about it again, like the coffee cups, when it comes to dopamine, introverts are like a 1 cup only. Extroverts are like, just bring it on and just keep refilling the cup. Introverts are the opposite. When it comes to acetylcholine, now it's the extroverts who are like, 1 cup only, please. I can't handle more than that. And it's the introverts who are like, just keep refilling it. Just the more I drink, the better I feel. So this is why introverts crave calm, quiet environments, because it allows us to turn inward. It feels better to our nervous system, and it allows us to basically, like, if you think about it, like turn the tap on the acetylcholine and feel really, really good, and it recharges us. On the flip side, if extroverts are exposed to too much acetylcholine from spending too much time by themselves, so drinking too much, coffee, if you will, if they spend too much time by themselves, that's when they get jittery and anxious and restless and bored. So just like introverts get bored when we get bored with small talk, right? Even though we're around tons of people, we get bored because we've already hit our limit on how much dopamine we're being exposed to. So is this making sense? Are there any questions or comments from anybody? If there are, then feel free to drop those into the comment section, and I'll be sure to answer those as we go along, because now we're going to switch to and talk about the nervous system. Now, the nervous system, this is really just an extension of what we were just talking about with the neurotransmitters. So, not going to spend too long here, but and that's because the nervous system actually uses neurotransmitters to send messages throughout the body. But in general, it's believed that introverts have a more sensitive nervous system than extroverts, and that is because of our, being more sensitive to external factors, noise, people, just all the things. So it requires we need time to recharge from that, and that's the whole point of that, is really to bring our nervous system back into regulation, so that it's not in like a it's in a neutral, non-triggered state. Okay. So there are two parts of the nervous system that I'm going to talk about here, just to touch on briefly. Again, it's pretty much an extension of what we were just talking about with the two neurotransmitters, but I'm going to just briefly touch on the parasympathetic nervous system and the sympathetic nervous system. Now, the parasympathetic nervous system is the part of our nervous system that calms us down. So if you've ever been in like a really anxious state, or you're all up in your head, or you're kind of nervous and stressed, if you stop and you take some slow, deep breaths in and slowly exhale, and you do that for a few rounds or a minute or so, what does it do? It makes you feel much more calm, right? Gets you out of your head. You feel more relaxed. That's because those deep breaths are activating your parasympathetic nervous system. And the primary neurotransmitter of the parasympathetic nervous system is acetylcholine. So introverts naturally prefer activities that utilize and activate the parasympathetic nervous system. Now, the sympathetic nervous system is the take action part of our nervous system. It's where like the fight or flight comes into play. If you got a tiger after you, you got to have the motivation and everything, your body needs to be flooded with something to get you moving, to get out of the way, to get out of danger, right? And that's dopamine. So extroverts have a greater preference for activities that utilize and activate the sympathetic nervous system. That's why they're more prone to take action and think less, and we're more prone as introverts to think through things and take less action, because we get to be on the inside. So now let's talk about the brain. So the last piece of this, in talking about the biological differences, is the brain. And studies have shown that introverts have thicker gray matter in the prefrontal cortex part of the brain. Now, the prefrontal cortex is right up here at the top, the front of your brain, and it is the part of the region of your brain that is responsible for things like analysis, planning, decision making, so kind of like heavy thinking things. And gray matter is the material. Processing happens within gray matter. There's more neurons in gray matter, and thicker gray matter is correlated to stronger analytical skills, cognitive ability. So when we as introverts are in very overstimulating environments where there's a lot going on, we're taking in all of these things that's happening. And because this area of our brain that's responsible for thinking and analysis and all that stuff has thicker material in there where the processing happens, we get very overstimulated. There's a lot of cognitive activity happening there, which is why, again, we get overstimulated in those circumstances. So this also explains why introverts tend to be more like, we think through things, we're daydreaming, we're lost in our thoughts, where extroverts maybe less so. Neither one is good or bad, neither one's better than the other. It's just biologically how we're wired. So now, just to summarize the difference between these biological factors and how they show up for us when we look at something like social events. Extroverts are energized by all of the people, all of the conversation, the noise, loud music. That is filling them up. They get more energy as the night goes on, right? They go to a loud concert, they just get more and more energy. And at the end of the night, the end of the event, they are like filled to the brim of energy. They don't need to recover from it. They feel really good. Whereas for introverts, it's not that we don't like events. It's not that we don't like being in like around people and concerts and parties and things like that. We do. But because of the way that we are wired, because of our biology, we need less of it. We enjoy it up into a point, and then we hit our max because of everything that's going on in our body. So instead of like where extroverts are like filling up their cup of energy throughout the evening, ours is getting depleted. We lose energy as we are going through social events. we will have less energy afterwards, and we will absolutely need time to recharge and recover after events. Now, the larger the party, the more noise or the more external stimulation, whatever, the louder the noise, uh, the quicker we get drained. The faster we are to be overstimulated and the quicker we get drained. So most introverts, like if you're at smaller parties, quieter parties, like a nice quiet dinner party, we can last longer at those type of events because our energy isn't getting drained from all of that stuff that's happening in our body. We also need less recovery time afterwards. Big, loud parties, probably going to need a little bit more recovery time from those. So now let's talk about the gifts that come, or the strengths that come with being an introvert because of these biological differences. So when we look at work, we are really great at being independent workers, where we can get into the flow, we can get into the details, we can do all of that analysis and thinking. And again, that's because of that acetylcholine. We're letting that flow, and that feels really good to us. So we can work really strongly independently. And if we're given the environment to do that, by the way. Our analytical skills and our problem-solving skills, they're on point. This is such a wonderful skill to leverage as an introvert because we are literally seeing things differently at a different level. And so we can provide more analysis, more thinking, and we can really, really help solve problems in a different way. So really take advantage of that and leverage it. Now, from a social perspective, because we aren't giving energy to everybody, we're pretty selective about who we're going to spend time with and give energy. We develop deep bonds with people. We are great listeners, and we're very loyal friends. So if you're friends with an introvert, if you're not an introvert and you're here and you're listening to this, if you're friends with an introvert, they are going to be very, very loyal to you. Your friendship means a lot to them, trust me. And finally, when we look at things like creativity, introverts tend to be very creative. Now, that's not to say that extroverts aren't creative. They totally are. My boyfriend is an artist, and he is probably an ambivert, but leans more to the extrovert side. He's a metal sculptor, professional metal sculptor, and he is very creative and very artistic. So introverts don't hold a monopoly on being artists or creative people, but because we have that tendency to be able to be in flow and enjoy being in flow for long periods of time, and we have that prefrontal cortex with that thicker gray matter where we're doing lots of cognitive thinking and we have these rich inner worlds, it does tend to lead to being very creative and artistic. Now, creativity is not limited to artistic endeavors. You can be very creative in how you solve problems too. So this is where we start to bring some of those strengths together. So now that we've kind of gone through all of that, and hopefully you have more insight into why you are the way you are, and that it's not anything you can change, let's quickly touch on what do you do with this information? Like, how do you take this and take it out into the world and start to use this to your advantage? And the first thing I can say to that is just don't see yourself as limited. Don't let yourself believe that you are limited because you're an introvert. You're not. You bring different gifts and skills to the table. So work with those strengths. Take time to identify them. So first, to go back to that point, challenge those thoughts that tell you that you're limited. Challenge them, choose not to believe them, and then get really familiar with what your strengths are. Take time to figure those out, lean into them, leverage them, make choices that align with how your system works. So if you have the opportunity to make some of these choices, choose smaller social events or gatherings. Take breaks as needed. Leave when you've had your fill. Don't stick around and stay at events just because you feel like you have to. You don't have to. You can leave. Make sure you build in recharge time. And if you have the opportunity to be able to work independently or find ways to work quietly, then lean into that. I was just talking with a client today, and he was saying that in April, he was able to get an office assigned to him just for the month to really work on this project he was working on. And he was like, that was so amazing just to be able to get into the flow. And there were several nights he realized, oh my gosh, it's like 7:00. I didn't even realize it. And it was such a wonderful environment for him because he's an introvert. So if you have that option to be able to find little places at work, if you work in like one of those open office companies, then take advantage of it. Find an extra conference room, find, an office, go to the cafeteria, something where you can find that time to work quietly and independently. All right, so just to wrap up what we talked about today, Introverts are biologically different from extroverts. We are different because of how our body responds to dopamine and acetylcholine, so the neurotransmitters. Introverts and extroverts are different. The parts of our nervous system that we feel more naturally aligned to, drawn to, different between introverts and extroverts. Our brain composition, how our brain functions, different. So because of this, it's not one, again, not something that you can overcome or fix, and you shouldn't have to. And it lends itself beautifully to providing us with gifts and strengths because of these biological differences. So the key is to understand those so that you can really lead with them and start to release the pressure from yourself to, again, pretend to be something that you're not. So next week, I am going to be talking about the third part of this. It's going to be the same time, 5:30 Eastern next Thursday. I'm going to be going into the third part of this series, and I'm going to be talking about leveraging your energy for success, which is key for introverts, is this introvert secret weapon, because our energy is everything. So when you think about like when you buy a new car, I think everybody knows the second you drive off the out of the dealership, right? As soon as you turn out of that parking lot, it's already depreciating. And that's how our energy is from the time we as introverts get up in the morning. Now, there are ways to manage that if you are aware of how it works. And so I am going to be talking about that next week. I'm going to be explaining how our energy works as introverts, be talking about what drains it, what are some things to do to refill it. I'm going to be talking about how you can track it. I'm going to be giving you some tips on what you can do to manage your energy better. And I'm going to be sharing one thing that is a key factor in what drains our energy that I have never heard anybody else talk about. I've never heard it shared before, but I know for a fact it's a key part of what drains our energy. So I'm going to be sharing that with you next week. So you definitely want to tune in because you probably have never heard this before, unless you're a client of mine. If you're a client of mine, you probably have heard it. But anybody else, it's probably going to be something new, and it's definitely something you need to be aware of to help better manage your energy. So definitely be sure to check that out. I'll be putting up the event for that this weekend, so you can make sure to sign up for that and get that into your calendar. And finally, if this is something that you struggle with, let me take that off. If this is something that you struggle with and you don't feel confident as an introvert, or you're exhausted from trying to put yourself out there as an extrovert, and you're really like, hey, this is something I would love to learn how to do, I just don't know where to start with it, then this is what I do. This is what I help my clients with. So I invite you to book a 45-minute, it's a free confidence kickstart call. And in this call, I will explore with you what's working, what's not working, what are your opportunities for when you start to change the way you look at yourself and your life as an introvert. And if it makes sense for us to work together, we can explore that. If it doesn't and it's not a fit, that's okay. No worries. But at the end of the day, either whether we work together or not, at least you can walk away with that greater understanding of what is working for you and what's not working for you. So you at least have some insight of next steps that you can take. So the link is there. Be sure to grab one of those because I would love to chat with you and help you start to have some more clarity around that. And with that, we're going to turn it over to any questions if there is anybody here. And if anybody has any questions or comments on what we talked about today. Okay. I don't see anything coming in, which is awesome. If you end up having questions on anything, if you think of something later, definitely reach out to me and let me know. I love answering these kind of questions and helping people understand. So reach out to me and yeah, let me know if you have any questions or any comments that you want to follow up on that you might not feel comfortable leaving here. But otherwise, I hope you have a lovely evening. Be sure to join me next week for part 3 when we dive into your energy, because that's so key. And yeah, hope you have a lovely evening.